All right, good morning, everyone. Ooh, loud. Thanks a lot for being here. Thanks to EarthRanger for letting Rob and I have the stage for an hour to talk to you all about a new, or not a new, but at least a way to think about your wildlife protection problems. And we've titled it Finding Smarter Solutions to Your Wildlife Protection Problems, because what we'll talk about today is how a framework for problem solving combined with software solutions like SMART and EarthRanger can be a very powerful tool for cracking some of these wicked problems that we're all dealing with. So before I start though, raise of hands, how many people in here are in a managerial position? How many people are managers in the room? Okay. How many of you are analysts? Ooh, okay, yeah, all right. Good. So we're going to talk a lot about the interaction between managers and analysts today and how to think about those interactions. But to start off with, how many of you have ever had a wildlife protection problem that just won't go away? Okay. Good, good. So you're in the right place. Rob and I have been writing for years for the right reasons then. This is something definitely that we all deal with, at the protected area level, at the counter-trafficking level. And what we're going to talk about today is how to maybe break those things down into more manageable chunks. You know, the opening keynote, somebody made the comment, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? And I think we're going to talk today about how do you solve a problem, and it's sort of one bite at a time as well. Let me start with an example of one of these sort of wicked, intractable problems. And this is a great study out of Borneo that was about illegal logging in communities. And again, it was one of these things where it just wouldn't go away, right? And it was threatening the wildlife there, it was threatening the canopy cover. And so the people who ran this project started thinking, okay, how are we going to solve this problem, right? And what's driving it? Why won't it go away? What could we be doing about it? And you know, what they do as natural, intuitive problem solvers is they start digging into the issue and talking to the community and trying to understand what's driving it. And what they find out is that the reason that a lot of people are going in and cutting down trees is because they're having acute needs for antimalarial medicine, people getting sick, need to pay hospital bills, don't have money, wood is money, let me go cut it. But also, when the agricultural season was coming up, fertilizer and seed, need money, how am I going to get it? I'll go cut down some trees, right? So the problem analysis showed these were two of the triggers that were causing this problem to happen. So they designed a response whereby they start subsidizing health evaluation, right? So this isn't just a one-year project, but over 10 years, they estimate that they were able to protect over 27 square kilometers of prevent 27 square kilometers of deforestation, but also because they'd been working in the communities monitoring how many people were engaged in illegal logging, they see a massive drop, right? From 8% of people over 19 down to 1%. Okay, so this is a great little case study of, you know, trying to undo one of those problems that you just can't get rid of. And if you think about what they did here, and some of the stuff we're going to talk a lot about today, is they started with a well-defined problem. They used analysis to break that apart. They considered the use of unconventional interventions, or at least non-law enforcement interventions. They developed partnerships with, you know, agricultural organizations as well as healthcare ones. They focused on prevention. But the best part, too, is they also focused on assessment, right? I can stand up here and quote this paper because they spent a lot of time making sure they could determine did it work or not, okay? And this is really what we want to also hammer home today, not only how to solve problems, but how to tell people about it and determine if it's been working. And I just want to, you know, mention here that the problems that we deal with in wildlife protection, you know, we call them wicked problems, but police have the same issue, right? And in the 1970s, policing was very much about let's reduce response times, let's get there as much as possible, increase patrols, right? But it was very, very reactive, and it wasn't really having impacts. In fact, when we look at policing research, we know that random patrols don't work to reduce crime. They sometimes increase fear among citizens, but they don't actually reduce crime. So in the late 1970s, a policing strategy known as problem-oriented policing emerges as a way to start being more proactive, right? Also recognizing the limitations of what police can do. And I think this is a quote that maybe one day I'll just have tattooed on my body because I say it everywhere I go. But you know, police are facing the same problem that we are, right? When the only tool you have is a hammer, all of your problems start to look like nails. If all you have is law enforcement capabilities, you just start treating everything like a law enforcement problem, right? And that just isn't how the world works. Problems have different shapes, different sizes. The police can't do everything, right? Rangers can't do everything. So we need to be thinking about, you know, how do we get past that, right? Like, how do we find the right tool for the job? Well, the problem-oriented policing approach developed something called the SARA process. And it's just a way of kind of working through a problem, not too dissimilar from adaptive management, but again, this was developed specifically for crime prevention and public safety. And it's pretty simple. It's called SARA because it's scanning, analysis, response, and assessment. But in general, it's, you know, pick a problem, analyze it in depth, choose a response, and measure the impact. And, you know, it's not that you just go always SARA. You might, you know, during your response realize, oops, we might have missed something. Let's go back to analysis and figure out why this isn't working. But the point is it's a great cycle because it really emphasizes this need of don't just pick a problem and respond to it. Pick a problem, think about it, dive into it, use that information that you have. Rangers have loads of information in their head. There's loads of information in databases across protected areas, but oftentimes we just are doing knee-jerk reactions. And Rob's going to talk a little bit about how to slow down and structure your team slightly differently. But what we're talking about doing here is taming these wicked problems, right? And a wicked problem up here in the right-hand corner, you know, people can't even agree on the definition of it or the solutions, but also more importantly, down here, there's lots of people who are there, right? Lots of parties, conflicts, conflicting priorities, right? So it's really difficult to solve these wicked problems. And what we're trying to do is get these to be tame, where both the problem and the solution become much more clear, right? At least the problem definition is very clear. But also the people who are working together either share the same priorities or they're indifferent to you know, getting in the way of one another. But how do you do that, right? Like, what's one of the first steps to walking towards that tame problem? And what it really comes down to is being specific, right? That's one of the first things you need to do is be specific. And so a photo like this, people look at it and go, yep, that's bushmeat hunting. We have a bushmeat hunting problem. You do, but there's a lot more you could learn from this photo, right? You could also look at it more carefully and say, well, actually in this photo, we can see the method that's being used. We can see the hunter type that's there. We're seeing the victim. We're seeing the time. We're looking at the place. And so part of the problem-oriented approach is you develop these specific problem statements, right? So instead of bushmeat hunting, we move it to nocturnal ungulate shooting accessed by motorbike in the north sector, right? Start taming that problem a little bit because bushmeat hunting has lots of drivers, lots of places, lots of people. So one of the things that we work towards is how to increase specificity, because what we know from crime prevention is that really it works best when you're specific, because we need to understand what drives and facilitates a problem, and because context is everything and it varies widely from one place to the next, without a problem statement like this, we're going to really struggle, right? We're not going to find the right partners. We're not going to find the right solutions, or at least it's going to be harder to. And after we've got that problem statement, what we're trying to do then is we're using our analysis to find levers. We want these levers that we can start pulling that are specific interventions that are going to switch the problem to the desired state we want, okay? And so in that analysis, one of the best ways to start is the 5 W's and 1 H. Who, what, when, where, why, how. You know, and a wicked problem is not dissimilar to a knot, you know, where we have these different things that we're pulling on, but when we pull on one, it pulls on the other. And to unwind the knot, you have to study it carefully and start pulling things one at a time. So this is how we need to start thinking about these problems. And as we go through that problem analysis, we also will start to see that we need to be thinking about how could we intervene, right? Because if you have this general timeline in a person's life, there's these remote causes of crime, right? Maybe they grew up near the park, they grew up in a hunting household, maybe they inherited debts, whatever it is. But more importantly, as we move further down towards the shooting event, we have these things that are immediate precursors, right? Maybe a financial need for anti-malarial medicine or school fees or loss of a job. And then as we get even closer to the event, we have triggers that are really in-the-moment decision-making where I'm going to choose this area because I know it's low patrol density, I know the ungulates are there, right? Or I know that I won't be caught on the way out. And anything left of that gunshot is general prevention, okay? But one of the things that we really teach in this problem analysis is it's very unlikely we're going to be able to ever control these, okay? We really, those remote causes of crime are difficult. Eradicating poverty is difficult. It's not saying we shouldn't be working towards it, but from an operational perspective, most wildlife protection teams aren't going to be working in that sphere, right? So what we want to be looking for is actually maybe some more of these immediate precursors because we might be able to influence here, right? We might be able to find levers that are related to those decisions that are happening in people's heads closer to the crime event or to the problem. And ultimately, all of us in this room have a bunch of levers inside of us, okay? It's not unlike this circuit breaker here. So when we're doing problem solving, we need to not only find those levers, but think about, how many are out there, as well as who's the right person to pull it. Sometimes law enforcement's the right person to pull it, but other times it's going to be, traditional leaders, church leaders, parents, children, all sorts of things, right? All these different people that might be better able to pull, or even a different organization, right? If law enforcement can't pull a healthcare lever, maybe a healthcare NGO can. Okay, so this is why partnerships become very key. So what are the key ingredients to a good problem-solving approach? Basically, what Rob and I have looked at over the years and when this has been successful is there's 6 key ingredients, maybe more, but these are the 6 that we really focus on. You're going to need a problem-solving team. You're going to need data. You're going to need analytic capacity. You're going to need management, partners, and review, right? And what we mean by sort of breaking these down is problem-solving team. You're going to need to think about retraining people, right? Introducing them to this approach so they know how to do it, teaching them how to, think differently about problems. The data, you're going to probably look in what you have yourself, but also you're going to start looking around and say, hey, who else might have information that we could be working with? And sometimes you might realize nobody's got it and you've got to collect it yourself. Analytic capacity, if you want to do this, you will need to invest in analysts, right? And I'm a huge fan of analysts because I really think they have the ability to make operations safer and more effective. And a lot of people talk about boots on the ground, which I agree we need that, but we also need boots under the desk. We need boots under the desk who can start helping people put together these data-driven operations. But also the reason I say boots under the desk is because those analysts need to be deployable to a certain extent, right? They need to understand the life and work of a ranger so that they don't start making recommendations that are completely devoid from operational realities. We need partnerships, dare to share. Everybody likes to hold their data to themselves, but ultimately that's why we're in the position we are, is because the data stops at the border of our protected area. If we want to deal with these bigger problems in groups that don't care about our borders, we need to be daring to share. It also helps us diversify our responses. From a management perspective, you definitely want to set some timelines, look for those quick wins of partnerships or data analysis you can do quickly, involve colleagues along the way. And under review, I've already highlighted the importance of case studies, but also this idea of ditching standard KPIs. How many kilometers you've walked, patrol area coverage, number of arrests. That's effort, 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 effort. That is not impact, okay? So we need to be thinking about how, for a specific problem, do we actually measure our impact. I'm going to turn it over to Rob now so he can talk a little bit more about the inner workings of these teams. So, cheers. That doesn't work, actually.
That's fine. Yeah. Thanks, Andy. So I'm just going to follow up from where Andy left off and dig into those key ingredients a little bit and ask how we can move past this being caught in a reactive trap into problem solving and how software solutions can help us with this to a certain extent. And a common trap that we do find ourselves caught in regularly is this, what's called leap to action syndrome. Often the pressure to do something in response to a problem being there, present, not going away, forces us to go and commit ourselves to certain actions or commit resources to dealing with that problem. But sometimes that's done without enough analysis taking place beforehand. And obviously, and part of this is the fact that it's relying very heavily on managers making decisions that have to be made often in the face of uncertainty, rapid decision making, and in an information poor environment. We have patrols going out regularly, there's teams that need to be tasked. And the thing here is that what these two quotes on this slide sort of show is how the pressure on the managers to react can sometimes lead us to falling into this trap. This top one is taken from a study that Tim Cooper, who presented the other day, did, interviewing managers in a protected area. And the bottom one is from a study looking at analysis within police forces in the UK, interviewing analysts and managers. And both of them highlight the fact that it's quite easy to fall into these traps of reaction. And this top quote, it's not that in this case necessarily that the manager's decision was wrong, that if a patrol comes back, let's say has found snares in the north sector, you might say let's send a follow-up patrol back to that north sector. But there could be an option there to say, well, let me ask the analyst, can you tell me, first of all, is that area, does crime concentrate there more than anywhere else in the park? If so, why? What are the factors that mean this area is targeted more? And then what are those other options that we can look at? I could send a patrol team back there, but can we do anything else? Is there anything that we can look at to control the access there? Can we look at bringing in any other guardians in that place? So what we want to try and do is just break out of that bouncing back and forth between scanning and response. They're actually implementing interventions that are working. And the thing is that when analysts can help with this, but if you go the other way, then analysts can be well embedded within an organization, but actually not achieve what they're there to do. And that's when the analysis is, and an analyst's role is misinterpreted. These terms, sort of considerations of the analysis, that's being the role of researchers or academics, or this term, the butterfly catchers, which is a good one that we use, kind of highlight the fact that if what the analysts are producing is either irrelevant or it comes out too slow, it's not actually going to influence the decision making by the manager, then it's not fulfilling its duty. So then you end up with a break in this SARA process where the response is taking place completely in the absence of the analyst's input. So that's another way in which it fails there. So that leads us to ask, what is the analyst there for? And it's important to be clear about the fact that the analyst in this setting, like at a site informing a protected area manager's decision, their job is really to dig into the guts of that wildlife protection problem that the site's facing, to become the expert in it, to really understand it inside out, what makes it tick, and then be able to interpret that to the manager, to influence the manager, to provide the detailed description about what the vulnerabilities of that problem are, where they lie, and present those options for interventions. And then the manager, as an informed consumer, will then make the decision about, okay, I'm going to invest resources in interventions A, B, and C to then impact that wildlife protection problem. But at the same time, obviously, this is a two-way street, and it relies tightly on that dialogue between the analyst and the manager, and the direction coming back from the manager to guide the analyst so that person is digging into the right problem and asking the right questions. And so to find those, what is the most appropriate lever to pull to reduce that problem, to prevent it from reoccurring, we have to be asking the right questions. And again, this is another kind of little failure trap that organizations can fall into. The police fall into it. These quotes from that police study, again, highlight the fact that sometimes analysts get asked to press the analysis button, generate some automated output to inform the police. The police look at that and, okay, we didn't really know what questions to ask anyway, so we're either going to use it to a certain degree or not really use it. But either way, if you're not digging into the context and picking apart that problem, then you're probably not going to find those really nifty little levers that can be cost effective and quite effective at shutting down the problem. And from a software perspective, this is where we have seen a couple of traps there whereby deeply standardized national data models that get rolled out can hinder that local problem-solving ability. We need to be able to allow the teams based at site and the analyst to configure their data systems locally to be able to update that as new questions arise, to help them to dig into the problem, to make sure we're asking the right questions. And when managers don't quite understand what the analyst's really there to do, they can be mistasked. And again, with the policing study, it showed this as well, that a lot of the time that analysts spend doing is not necessarily directly related to analysis. You can be doing a lot of data entry, some ad hoc GIS work, some database admin, grant writing in some cases, but all of that just bleeds down your battery. And so you've got a very specialist resource there in the team. And the more sort of tasks you put on that person's shoulders, because you're not asking the right questions, you're not giving them that direction, you just suck out their time, so they're not actually able to have the headspace to then think about the problem deeply enough. Now, software can help with that, particularly when it reduces data processing times and simplifies certain routine tasks. But I think from a sort of developer's perspective, and those of us who are involved with implementing software, we just have to think about what we want to have is systems that empower the analyst. We want to need certain routine visualizations take place, perhaps, but we just want to make sure we're not just bypassing the analyst to try and sort of put the burden of interpretation on the shoulders of the manager alone. And when we go through this and we think about it and we think about the specific tasks that different people have to do, we might realize that we actually need more staff. And a kind of a rule that we found certainly within Panthera that is recurrent is the more tech you bring on or the more information streams, the more staff you need to manage that data, to process it, to curate it, to collect it. So just let's not forget about the human capacity there, because I think that is another trap that we fall into. This little diagram here, for instance, indicates that a lot of the roles that maybe would be done by one person, perhaps should be split up amongst three here. And this blue fellow here, the image specialist, that was one role that was developed in one of our protected areas to deal with the volume of information coming in from the cameras and the patrol stops. And that was an incredibly powerful role because that individual was able to sort of recognize people very effectively, to be able to link who was detected in a camera to who was detected on patrols to who was then seen in the community meetings. And that role was powerful because it then enabled, coupled with the analyst, they were able to then recommend individuals, repeat offenders who are like low-level offenders, to the community engagement team that was working outside the park that didn't have awareness of them, to put them onto alternative livelihood schemes. And so, yeah, one of the key ingredients that Andy mentioned is data. And for the analysts to do their job, they need data. And another trap that we face, all organizations face this, is this tendency to drift into data silos. The more we bring in specialist teams in an organization, they're going to have their own information requirements. They might have their own information collection systems. They might have their own databases. And so within wildlife departments, within an NGO, you can end up with this sort of fragmentation of the data across the organization, stored in these in this visual, sort of like having all your data in these enclosed cans on the shelf. Now, that really limits our complete understanding of the problem. And so we need to find ways to sort of like prise the lids off those cans and bring it together. From a software perspective, some of the systems that we've been talking about here are very good at doing that, at pulling the data from different sensors and patrols to combine it in a single database. But traps that we find which are maybe a little bit more knotty are, for instance, when we have community teams or sort of investigations teams and patrol teams. You see these major sort of divisions, like massive firewalls between sharing of information. that prevents the creation of these data drops. But I think we just need to find those ways where, if start by just mapping, like where is the data stored within the organization? Can we form those little workflows or put people into contact with each other to develop these more powerful syntheses of the problem, these more powerful analytic products? Because when we do that, we start to find more levers. And so the last ingredient that I'll talk about here is the fact that to do that, we need to create a problem-solving team. And how should we do that? Well, a general rule is to build the team around the shape of the problem. So when we say that, we mean like look at something about the nature of the problem, where it's occurring. Can we pull in the right people who have a natural interest in the problem and who can bring in different insights, who have different subject matter expertise to apply, and have a bit of a diversity of skill sets. So in this example, forming one team, a mix of patrols, investigations, biological monitoring in some cases, community and livelihoods programs, and education and awareness, but forming them into a team. And that can mean retasking staff from existing duties into this, but then making sure that team is empowered. They're given the ability to work together. The analysts can then talk to each other across organizations without having to go up through management hierarchies. And just an example of that, you can either work locally, very locally, next to your site if your problem is local. But in terms of building the problem around building the team around the shape of the problem in Malaysia that we faced with the Vietnamese poaching, we realized that our problem team operating at the site scale there was not able to adequately address that problem. So we needed to build a problem team then, which reached across between Malaysia and Vietnam, that we knew we could work with a team in the communities in northern Vietnam where the poachers were coming from, because of the fact that they were making the decisions right there about going into Malaysia to conduct poaching. So that's one example of a team that's sort of more of a transnational problem team. But I'm just going to pass back at this stage back to Andy, and he's going to then talk to us about how to build a problem team.
Thanks, Rob. And just a couple more slides, because we wanted to save a lot of time for discussion, because we figure there's questions and maybe even concerns about this approach. But at Lead at Lead Conservation, I run the Lead Analyst program, and we've started creating a development pathway for our partners. What does it look like to onboard this approach, or to get it into your operations? And really what it's going to begin with is some sort of foundational course in what is problem solving, what are the tools and techniques we can be doing with it, what are some of the criminological theories that we can use to interpret people's behavior, how can we draw from ideas of opportunity reduction. So by starting with a foundation course for your team, and again, this can be everybody, right? Panthera, when we ran it with their Thailand team, everybody in the organization joined, from the country director down to the person dealing with livestock, because they knew their problem was wicked and it had different people. So everybody needed to at least know the basics, right? From there, you start to develop what we call a problem profile, which is basically a living document that summarizes who, what, when, where, why, and how, and what you're doing to deal with the problem, right? So that's really the analysis, the summary of the analysis, which helps you then develop a response plan. Based on what we're seeing, this is what we should be doing. These are the levers we want to pull, and this is who's going to pull them. And ultimately, if you do that well, or even if it fails, let's be honest, like capturing failure is also really important here, you should end up with some sort of case study, right? Like the one that I opened up this talk with. And what's nice is a year ago, we didn't have any publicly available case studies, but over this year, 3 have become available. Okay, there's the Saving Spots program that Panthera did in Zambia with changing real furs for synthetic furs for ceremonies with one of the groups there. There's the work that Rob and his team have been doing in Malaysia on taking a very problem-specific approach to deep forest poaching, that they were dealing with. And that work was, supported by U.S. Fish and Wildlife and INL. And then there's also this really nice summary, and this is more of a policy level document than the in-depth science research that WCS India put together on different examples of intuitive problem solving they've seen in India, where they, for example, the migrating falcons were being poached, and in 2012, they estimated 120,000 of these birds were trapped in a 2-week period, and even 10 years later now, there haven't been any more poaching events, right? Because they intuitively applied this problem-solving framework. So what we want to see is more of those, because case studies also help us teach each other how we might think about problems and analysis. And I'll just give one more example of a case study that's under development. And this is going to look like some sort of drawing in a cave, because I wanted to keep it pretty high level. But in essence, the group that I've been working with for a couple of years now, they had a protected area with animals in it, specifically ungulates, right? But they also had people who were out there hunting with snares, like most people in this room probably do. And so this is a problem that they'd been dealing with for more than a decade. And they're like, we want to try something different, right? I'd been training them in the problem-solving approach. So they say, look, let's try if we can apply that here. So they start doing their problem analysis, and what they find is actually there's a number of groups that all have some sort of leader and some people who help, right? Again, probably not dissimilar to your snaring problems. And so they start thinking, okay, what are we going to do with this problem? And they realize that actually they have the ability through their community teams to reach out and approach some of these leaders. Because again, the vulnerability in the hunting script was that somebody starts the whole process. Somebody finances it. Somebody has the skills to set it out, right? So they approach about 60% of these hunting group leaders, and they talk to them and say, why are you doing this? What do you want to, what would help you get off of this livelihood or get off of this way of earning money? And again, these people were part of a community. So they start saying, look, we don't really like doing this. We just don't know another way to earn money. We're kind of living hand to mouth, and we don't like this because our neighbors don't like this as well necessarily. So in discussions with them, they decide, look, what if duck farms? So they give these about 60% of the hunting leaders duck farms, very low cost investment. But the idea was that this would be some sort of tangible income that they would see, but also something to eat up time, right? It would give them something to do. And over time, these ducks, they hatch and they don't earn as much money, but the fact that they had income on the horizon, these individuals start diversifying their income, right? They start maybe doing a little bit of cassava farming, or they maybe start working with fishing. Again, all legitimate conservation, pro-conservation behaviors, but they didn't, because they knew that income of those hatchlings was on the horizon, they started diversifying. And then what we see from the data is that those people who got engaged with the program, snaring in their areas stops, because we had spatially explicit data that showed they were snaring here, the other people were snaring here, and snaring disappears in those areas. They stop hunting. In fact, it goes down 95% in 1 year, all right? Because they hit most of, a good part of the problem. And even the second year, it's still down. We've seen a slight amount where one new group might be moving in, but the people who are engaged in this program have abandoned that practice. But the other thing is that there was these very great social benefits where the people, the hunters said, look, I feel like I can be part of my community again. I'm not ashamed of what I'm doing. When my neighbor asks what I did today, I don't have to say, I was in the forest, because they were sort of outcasts. So it was this brilliant example of using a very humanistic, holistic approach to the problem. But for $300 for duck farms, they took care of 80% of a problem that they'd been battling for a decade, right? But it was that focus. It was a very spatially focused, problem-focused. So anyways, this is just one more case study to show, and we're hoping this becomes publicly available this year. So anyways, moving forward and getting into the discussion, I just want to point out that we've been working closely with the Center for Problem-Oriented Policing for a number of years now. Some of you might have been here before. If you haven't, if you go to their homepage, there's a button there at the bottom called Wilderness Problems. Everything we've been writing about and all these case studies are available there, open access. You can print them. You can, just don't sell them, please. But you can print them, do whatever you want with them, share them. And most importantly, our latest book is this problem analysis for wildlife protection in 55 steps. It's a step-by-step guide on how to walk your team through the SARA process. I have 26 copies of the book here that are here to give out to people. Please come and get one. I'll ask you to put your email down so I know how to get in contact with you. Also, please only take one if you're really going to read the book, because it's available online. One of the QR codes on the back of that sheet, you can get this. But this is meant to be a very user-friendly guide for solving problems. And everything we've written for the Pop Center is written for practitioners. It's based in science, but it's written for users. So finally, the key takeaways for today that we want you to go away with is that, problem solving really lives and dies by leadership. If leadership isn't bought in, this is going to be a problem. This is why at Lead Analyst, we're training analysts and managers at the same time so that everybody's aware of how this process works. People are going to need time, resources, and training. Again, if you're interested in training, talk to me. Lead, that's what we do. Rob does training within his organization for his partners. Lead, we do training for anybody. That's our mandate, basically. Get specific. I think that's come out a number of times. Build the team around the problem. Also really think now, and this is something James Slade and I have talked about a lot, if you want to do this, you need to write it into grants and work plans, right? We know that everybody's got too much to do, and at the end of the day, you do what's in your work plan or what's in your donor work, your donor reporting. So start thinking about that, and also write your case study up. And if you want help writing up case studies, because some of you may say, hey, we've already done this, please let us know. We will help you. That's another thing Lead does, is help mentor you through that process. The Pop Center gives us an outlet for publishing these things if you want to do it publicly. So I'm going to leave it there. I'll put up these discussion questions that, if you want to talk about some of these, fine. Otherwise, we'll open it up to questions now. And thank you very much for your time.
Questions?
So from your guys' experience with all the training and teaching on around this, how do you change the mindsets and the ways of thinking in managers to get the slowdown effect as much as possible in order to gain the expertise of those analysts before the decisions are made?
Yeah. Want me to take a crack? Yeah, so one, this is why we find the case studies to be so important, because without a case study, this seems like a kind of a dream. But the case studies can start to show people, look, it does work. And especially in policing, we know that this has been proven time and time again to reduce crime. So part of it is showing people examples of it working before. But also this is where the training managers and analysts at the same time, so that people can start to see, wait a second, if you slow down and dig into the problem a bit more, you start to see the value of that. Is one way we've been doing that. But something that I learned recently, a quote that I really like, is that culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? You can have a great strategy, but if the culture isn't ready to embrace it, it's just going to be gone immediately. So we really need to be thinking about how to sensitize management to this. But ultimately, I wouldn't be up here and writing books and doing everything. I didn't think this would work if I didn't know that it can work. And so it's just a matter of building those case studies. And once you have them, it's fantastic. And the group, the case study I put there at the end, this was a huge, when they were able to do this, it became a huge piece of momentum for their program nationally, right? They did this in one small sector of one national park, but it was so successful, them and their national government partner went, okay, we want to try this again. Can we apply this to a different problem? So that's part of it. And Rob, I don't know if you have anything else, and make sure you talk into this thing.
Yeah. Just to add on that one, one other thing that we found worked quite well is to sort of start to build in certain processes. So that initial scanning part is quite critical. So the managers are deciding, okay, what are the top priorities, and then selecting from that, okay, which one or two problems are we going to really invest extra time and effort to dig into more deeply. And so part of the work that we've been sort of doing has been developing little templates, guides to sort of put together some of those key sort of backbone products to sort of help move that team with the manager and the analyst together through right into the problem-solving stage. So, yeah, I found that's been working as well to sort of help to bridge the divide. So at least you have that initial, we call it a threat assessment that we do at a site first, and then these top priority problems, like maybe the top 3, get then formalized into the overarching strategy. So it's at like a strategic level, we're going to commit that resources into cracking that, and then once that mandate is there, then it makes it easier to work and have that analyst tasked appropriately.
There's one right here, you can't see him.
Ninja presentation. I really, really enjoyed it. I mean, and the reason I say that is actually what you're cracking into here is this idea that you've got to have an adaptive, functional approach to the way that you look at it so that everyone knows where they plug in, all that sort of stuff. But I also want to I want your thoughts and come back to your important question, which is, it's also recognising when you're doing this data collection and the analysis that one of your customers is the people that are going on the ground.
Part the data from that was collected, so to understand the nature of the incursion that happened, what changed, what was new, what was different, and then do a full dissection of the operation. And then that process will involve like multiple rounds of like group debriefs, but then one-on-one interviews with key decision makers within the patrol teams that were involved in that operation. And then when that person had completed their findings, then brief that back to the patrol team, and then through that process identify the failure points, because there will undoubtedly be some like how did these guys get away, or how did we miss that incursion at that stage. And then the important thing there is like this, getting that that consensus on then how we should change the SOPs, because certainly with the team that we're working with in Malaysia, Orang Asli indigenous people who, that don't
over time, they might collect data, but it also may not be that interesting, or it becomes less effective data because they sort of see it as, well, it doesn't matter. And then you end up in the garbage in, garbage out cycle, which just reinforces why data capture isn't important. So absolutely, like in my opinion, if you're sending men and women out into the bush, you should be doing that to have an effect, right? And you should be doing that in a safe way. And if you can't prove that, you should really be considering, like, why are we doing this then? In my personal opinion, because there's a lot of risk out there, and we can be using data to get better effect, lower risk, all of this. But right now, a lot of times the data gets stored away, and then maybe 5 years later, an assessment is written about it. But as soon as you couple it to operations, then it's fire, huh? Then you can't stop that, because you're really reinforcing the reason we're collecting this data is to help you in the ground. That is what it's for. And that's also to help managers have impact, right? We're all here to save animals. We're not here to collect data. So that's a really important point. Thanks for raising it.
Yeah, just a quick one for you guys, because I kind of know the answer, but it's more of a comment. Could you give a little bit of insight on the sort of support and advice that you've had from the urban policing world to apply this into a conservation context? Yeah,
great. So the Center for Problem-Oriented Policing, again, they've been doing this since, well, the center's been around for about 25 years now. And I approached them to say, look, we're out in the field training analysts. We're using a lot of your materials. what do you think about, working with us a little bit? And they sort of were like, what? You guys are using problem-oriented policing in, protected areas? And they were very keen because they saw it as a way to expand their model to a place they couldn't be. So in essence, the Center for Problem-Oriented Policing has given us carte blanche to work with them at zero cost, right? As well as a humongous network of practitioners and academics who, if we ever need anything, they can help us out, right? They help review our documents. They help provide support. So, and we were just recently at the big international conference for problem-oriented policing, in which Panthera's team from Zambia won the international award for problem solving, right? First time it's ever been a wildlife problem, first time it's ever been a problem in Africa, and first time an NGO won it. They beat out 4 policing agencies from the UK because they had done such a good job of applying this model to a problem. It was fantastic. They walked away with the international award, and everybody had nothing to say because their project was the best. It was absolutely the best. So just to put it out there, we do have that policing support group behind us, as well as a number of, we're building through Panthera, LEAD, WCS, James, Rewild, a cohort of practitioners within this sphere who are doing this more and more as well. And that's also my role at Lead Analyst, is to help build that neural network of people around the world who want to do this. Andrew?
Yeah, thanks very much, guys, for the presentation. I think excellent. Yeah, I think one of the things that would be useful, and I mean, I know you guys are both involved with URSA, is reframing the sort of ranger world using some of the language around problem solving, right? Because I think that's not half the problem, but that's one of the issues, is the terminology in the conservation industry around rangers and their work, and that they're actually part of a problem solving team. And I think there's quite a bit to do there, so it's more of a comment, but yeah, happy to try and help and support that.
Yeah, thanks a lot, and I completely agree. And interestingly enough, problem solving in policing, the tip of the spear is the frontline officer. It's just the same way that rangers are, right? Rangers know more about the problems than the analysts will because they see them every day. They interact with them. And so one of the things I'm also working on with LEAD in the coming year is to develop like a very short module for like how to be a problem-solving ranger, right? Which would look into how do you as a ranger see yourself in the team, right? Both as a responder as well as somebody who can kick stuff up and say, hey, we're seeing this new problem. We should be digging into this a bit more, right? And they don't need to know how to do the analysis, but what they should know is what the analytic products look like. They should be able to provide direction up to say, hey, we would like to know this more. And again, moving more than just where we've walked and how many things we've found, but what are some of the who, what, when, where, why, how that we could be looking for, or how could we collect better information? So completely agree, and that's something we'll continue that discussion with James and Andrew.
Any other questions?
Sorry, it's just a follow-up. I just thought of it now, but you spoke, at one of the slides, you spoke about the sort of metrics, like using incorrect metrics or KPIs or whatever it was. Do you guys have any ideas there? Because that's a real issue for us, I think, is the metrics used for ranger success, length of patrol, time in the field, snares pulled. A lot of it's not valuable in terms of actual effect that they're having. So just, any ideas?
Do you want to give some examples, Rob?
Yeah, and I think that is a good point. And I think to a certain extent, if the metrics can be coupled with the problem, like if we know what we're trying to reduce a specific problem, we're asking certain rangers to reduce it, the metrics kind of need to show how we are getting through to that end state of that particular problem going down. I think that's where, framing them in terms of like a snaring problem or a bushmeat problem being that too broad to really dig into at the right level. If we can have those more precise metrics that show, okay, for instance, like with the snares one, we flipped from snares pulled to then the percentage of the snares that were pulled which were taken before they were actually deployed, so they're prevented, or things a bit like that, but a bit more sort of tailored to the specific problem. is reluctant to report bad news, and that can lead to suppression of information collection at the ranger level. So identifying, okay, we got these key problems. Let's just see, can we squish them down? But they have to be, packaged well enough to be able to be, achievable. If you don't pass that crush test, then you're going to be stuck forever trying to reduce a very fiddly problem. So, I think that's just one point there.
Yeah, and I would say also a lot of ways that we start. I'm thinking to Tim's presentation on Project Fire, right? Their measure was the percentage of the rhino population that was being poached, right? Not the number of rhinos being poached, but what percentage in each reserve. So usually getting to a better metric involves some sort of rate, right? In this case, it'd be like a murder rate, right? If police would be looking at their successes, what's the murder rate? We could be looking at in some cases, right? Or no snares might just be no patrols. That's my joke to people. Is you want to get rid of your poaching problem, just stop patrolling because there won't be any problem, right? So that's one way. And again, one thing that I would like to do with people who are interested is provide better guidance to groups to say, look, if you're dealing with snaring, these are the metrics you should be using. We don't really have that right now, but I think it would help because it would help people build data models. It would help people move around. But the biggest question to always ask yourself, am I measuring effort or am I measuring impact, right? And walking and patrolling, that's effort, right? Arresting people, that's effort. It has nothing to do with the problem, right? The problem either goes up or down depending on what you do. So I hope that helps. It's not a perfect answer, but I know it's a complex thing as well.
Any other questions?
Could I just offer one observation as well? I think it's also really important to really focus on decision making and the ability of having a park director or a country director whose time is very precious, and you need to present products that they're able to understand very quickly to make the decisions. And equally, the presentation of products for your frontline teams. Yep. Because I've worked with some amazing analysts, and I've had a screen of ones and zeros. And he said, look at that. And I was like, look at what? And he's like, can you see there's 3 ones in a row? And I'm like, wow. I think you get my point. Don't mean to be too fun.
No. And this is great. And again, in 55 steps and some of the stuff we've been working on are some of these tools that help you present stuff. Like, for example, the wildlife crime continuum, which is, a very simple diagram that shows the different roles involved, right? So who's hunting, but how does that product get from a harvester to a consumer, right? And it's a visual, huh? And the same thing with a crime script. It's just this timeline of, okay, we know there's a poaching event here, but what's happening in preparation? What's happening in the pre-activity? How do they actually commit the activity? What happens afterwards? But I completely agree. And if you work, some of the analysts I've worked with who came out of the military, if you were briefing the general, you got one slide. You get one slide, right? And that's also where we need to be. And this is where, again, in 55 steps, we've tried to put together some of these more visual things because they can work up and down, right? Because it's both teams have not a lot of time to read a bunch of stuff, and we need, most importantly, for analysts to producing product that result in questions, right? That's what we need. We need people to present something and then have follow-up questions. If you're an analyst and you make a presentation and nobody asks a question, you failed miserably, is my advice. And that's what I teach the analysts that I work with.
Just as an example for Greg there, I showed Andrew and Rob the other day, we're trialing a whole bunch of different things because a lot of this is quite new and novel, and so we used an ArcGIS story map to use a highly visual approach to showing the park director in Vietnam the crime script work that had been done and everything to that point. And because it was so visual, they were able to absorb it a lot easier, we found, and then they enabled us to now include an element of crime prevention into their next year's sustainable forest management plan. So
Beautiful.
because they're able to see it and understand it without it just being tables and metrics and things like that, which of course we have, it's a much easier way for them to sort of comprehend what we're trying to do.
Anyone else? Thank you so much for coming. I hope it was interesting. Again, you've got our information. If you're interested in training opportunities, I'm the guy to contact. If Rob also can help out in certain ways. If you want a copy of 55 Steps, come up here, sign the document, because I've got your email. Thank you so much.